we were the first company that was focused on land investors.
Exclusively, right? On land as an asset class. Yeah.
Yep. Now, when you get towards the end of the month and now you've dialed this list, you're at 95,000 dials on this list, and you're maybe getting a lead a day. Our job, as I view it, is to be the experts that say, okay, at this point, yes, could we still trickle out some leads? Of course. But the best ROI on your caller's time is going to be to find a new list, right?
This is kind of just a generalization, but I've found cold calling to be, I don't know, maybe about 40% cheaper than direct mail. Is that fair or close? King Show, I've got with me here a gentleman who's come on the scene in the last couple of years, has really helped a lot of land investors with lead generation, as we've seen more and more folks get into this, and we've seen response rates kind of go down. This individual and his service has really stepped in at a time that was needed, where we need leads, we need them quick, we kind of need them on demand, and is really filling a gap, I would say, in the market where there's not a whole bunch of vendors doing this and doing it at this level or doing this well. I'd like to introduce you to Joe Roberts of the Landcaller. Hey, Joe, how's it going?
Doing great, Travis. Great to be here with you.
Hey, where are you calling in from?
Yeah, I live in Eastern North Carolina, just north of Wilmington, right on the coast near Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, where I was stationed. So we settled down here after I got out of the Marine Corps.
Okay, and that's what we were. So when did you join the Marines? At what age did you join the Marines?
Well, so I went to the Naval Academy for college. So 18, I went to college there. That's up in Maryland. And then when I graduated, I commissioned as a Marine. So I was technically Navy before that, and then graduated as a Marine and as a 22-year-old back in 2012.
Yeah. Okay. So how long were you in?
Just shy of 11 years active duty, not including the time at the Naval Academy.
Okay. All right. So that right out of college then?
Yeah, basically from the time I graduated high school until the time I left the Marine Corps in early 2023. I was a military employee and had a paycheck every 2 weeks for 15 years. So
so there's obviously some overlap there, knowing when you got into this, right? Where did the overlap start, or how did you find real estate and specifically like land?
Yeah, so real estate was always something I was kind of aware of in terms of that I wanted to invest in it. My parents had a few rental properties growing up, so I kind of knew the power of it. My grandfather had successfully grown a nice real estate inventory using 1031 exchanges. So I was aware of it. I bought my first house as a flight student, 22-year-old second lieutenant. And then when we moved, it got stationed elsewhere. We kept it and rented it out. So it was like, okay, that was kind of my first foray, but then nothing really happened for the next 5 years. I was deployed in Afghanistan in 2018. And when you're on a forward operating base in Helmand and you're not running missions, there's not a whole lot else to do except for reading. So I did a lot of reading, and I discovered Bigger Pockets. I discovered some different authors. And so I kind of used that 10-month deployment as a chance to kind of get smart on real estate in general. When I got back, I started to invest in single family and small multifamily real estate, buying fixer-uppers, renovating them, and then renting them out, keeping them and renting them out.
Renovating then and doing, you said multifamily also?
Small, like 4-unit, 5-unit, that sort of thing.
I think that's a beautiful place to start. Duplex, fourplex is where you probably should cut your teeth, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it was a good time to be in it. Interest rates were still ridiculously low. Prices were still coming up, even still out of the 2008 crash. 2020 was still a good time. And then 2021 kind of came around, and the market just started getting crazy. And for me, I was buying these houses with the intent of fixing them up right, keeping them as a rental property, long-term asset. And I was just getting bid out by flippers who wanted to put lipstick on a pig, right, and turn around and resell it. So I couldn't afford prices anymore, essentially, with single-family homes. So I kind of took a pause for a bit. And I was at a real estate conference in 2021 and met who's now a great buddy of mine, JT Olmstead.
Awesome. Yeah, he's local to me here. Yeah, we've met up in person.
I love JT. Have JT to thank for getting me into land, because we randomly sat down at the same table for lunch and just started talking.
JT is a blind offer boss, and also maybe he's not running like the storefront, like capital funder type thing, where everybody's aware of his brand. But he's been funding deals for years. So definitely
funding deals. He's been building software with the with Terranotes and everything. So basically, I realized I had never heard of land investing or flipping or whatever you want to call it, but I realized like it wasn't really much different from what I'd been doing with single family, in the sense that a lot of my single family deals had actually come off market. Like I'd done direct mail campaigns, I cold called people. And so in addition to MLS listings, some of my properties I've just found myself. So I was like, all right, well,
Yeah.
if I can do this for homes, I can do this for land. So I cranked up a land flipping business. Essentially, I was still active duty and still deploying. I deployed twice actually while I was kind of building the land stuff out.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically just took what I knew from house flipping, applied it to land.
Right.
And back then it was easier than it is now. I'll definitely throw that out there, because I was just doing blind offer, direct mailers, you know, a student
Yeah.
of JT's, and the response rate was fantastic. You almost had to try to not get a deal, to be honest. If you sent out,
I started over a decade ago, and there were situations we were like 1 to 4% like response rate with direct mail. You know what I mean? Like 4% response rate was insane. And that's definitely and I think like you kind of like given the timeline there, the black swan events, right? Like the pandemic, right? So I feel like when COVID happened and drove up values of homes, right? You had all these. I know because I've coached a lot of people that have migrated over from house wholesaling, you know, to land, house flipping, house wholesaling to land. And when those home values skyrocketed, at the same time, there was all these new players getting into it. Like we call them iBuyers, right? You always have like the We Buy Ugly Houses, right? But then all of a sudden Zillow started buying houses. Like, you know what I mean? You started Open Door, OfferPad. You've got so many companies that jump into the game. And now they've got these, like, it feels like unlimited marketing budgets to where they're competing, you know, with the wholesalers, right? Who guys like solo acts, right? Or small micro teams. And we don't have the same marketing budget. So I know a lot of house wholesalers that were, you know, sending 3,000 postcards getting a deal. And then it went to 6,000. Then it went to 9,000 postcards to get a deal. And then the deals got thinner and thinner. And these guys go from doing 20, 40 deals a year to like 2 or 4. And then they naturally look for a new asset class. And then they find the holy grail of land, right? But as this flood of people come over that some of the gurus probably don't want to acknowledge or talk about, but it's just the reality, is as more people came over, right, and are doing more marketing, sellers kind of become like desensitized, and there's response rates suffer from it. It's still, I really believe, still some of the absolute highest quality leads you'll get, you know, the highest cost per lead of any marketing channel I'm aware of, but some of the highest quality leads. But you started out with direct mail, right?
Yeah, I did. Like almost all land investors, especially any land investor that started 2021 or prior, like almost everybody started with direct mail. And I would still say that's the majority of people. And I would still say it's a great model. Like the best leads you're going to get are a direct mail blind offer, properly priced. Like there's not a hotter lead. Now, I think the big caveat there is that that's a very expensive lead to get. There's that big asterisk of properly priced. And then C, like to your point about saturation in the market, you're now competing with people as a newbie, right? So if you approach it as a newbie I'm going to start off with direct mail, well, you're approaching it like if you're going into Georgia, Arizona, you're trying to compete with JT. JT sends out like 1 million mailers a year, and he's a freaking data scientist. He's got it down literally to a science. So you are trying to compete with bigger and bigger players and experienced players in a very expensive lead generation method. So it's good, but I don't necessarily think it's the best for newer people, unless you have kind of an expert on your side that's really going to coach you up on market selection and your letters
pricing,
and stuff.
like you said, that's key, right? Pricing is
so key.
One of the biggest challenges, you know, in the industry. I would say like the most common questions, and it's fair because they're probably the most important questions. Like when I coach or somebody starts land, is one, how do I intelligently pick a market, not just throw a dart at a map, right? Like how do I know what a good market is? And then 2, how do I price, right, an offer? Because that's herein lies all the opportunity for land. That's why it's an inefficient market. Is it's not like houses where you can grab the Zestimate, the Redfin. There's 20 different automated valuation methods, right, where you can get a feel for the price of a home and be pretty darn close without knowing the upgrades inside, right? You can be close to land, like we know, a whole different animal. Sometimes the assessed value has nothing to do with the actual value. So pricing, that's the second thing, is like, how do I estimate value, or then how do I price a campaign if I'm doing unsolicited blind offers like with purchase agreements, right? So I think you're right. I think like somebody starting out taking that like neutral letter or open letter, or
Mm-hmm.
neutral cold call, open cold call, however you want to call it, like that approach of like, let's just find some motivated people, then we will value it one at a time, then we'll extend an intelligent, accurate offer,
Mm-hmm.
versus trying to pre-price a campaign of 10,000 rows of data when you're new, right?
Yeah,
So I
because
think
that's
you're
a
right. I
very
think that's a
expensive
really good
mistake to make.
approach.
Because I've made
Yeah,
that
it is all
mistake.
day long. I'll have people say
I've
like,
made that.
people will inquire about coaching and they'll go, man, that's a big investment. And then, you're just kind of like, chuckling in your head because you go, well, circle back to me after you've wasted 10 grand, like
Yeah.
spraying and praying in bad markets with marketing. And you've wasted 6 months, you've wasted several $1,000s on marketing, doing it wrong. Then you start to go, well, maybe it's a pretty solid
Yeah.
investment. But yeah, I'm with you. So I think you're right. So you're kind of talking about people starting out your business. I'll give people that aren't familiar some context. Landcaller, when you came on the scene, you were actively running a land investing company. You identified cold calling, right? It is a great lead generation channel. And then what? You recognize kind of that opportunity. Hey, I'm doing it myself. This could also be an advantage for other investors. I'm going to formalize this and start a company and run it in parallel to what I'm doing, or is that
Pretty
pretty
much.
accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I mean, I was preparing to get out of the Marine Corps, so I had a lot of stress on my shoulders about making sure I could provide for my family, because this was my bid for success. I built it up into a successful land flipping company, but it's still,
Yeah.
again, for a guy that's been getting a government paycheck since he was 18, like it's a
Yeah.
big step to take. I had 5 kids at the time. Now I have 6. And so it's like, all right, this has got to work.
Oh
So,
yeah.
but at
Yeah.
the
You got
same time,
responsibilities. Yeah.
yeah, the same time it was happening was when my direct mail response rates were starting to really slip. I mean, everybody was seeing it. It was right around 2020, late 2022, and things are just starting to go downhill in terms of what we had historically seen for
Yeah.
response rates. Cost of mail was going up every 6 months, it still is.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, all right, I need an additional lead gen source to make this business work. So I tried texting, didn't like it at all. Didn't really feel like it was a good, what we call in the Marine Corps, a weapons to target match for the type of seller I wanted to get after. And so I was like, I'll try cold calling. I'd cold called for a house before and landed it. So I was like, let's try it for land. Did it myself. It was great. Worked. Terrible use of my time in terms of ROI on my time to be calling however many people. So I had a VA who had previously worked as a cold caller. So I had her do it. It was still working, but again, really bad use of my time in the sense that like I was spending all this time learning the dialer and training her and listening to calls for quality assurance. And I was like, and learning all this stuff about regulatory requirements and compliance and stuff. And I was like, man, I'm still not really spending time on the part of my business I should be. So let me just outsource this. So I talked to Seth Williams because I figured if anybody knows of a company for land investors that does cold calling, Seth's going to know them.
You said
And
let's get in touch with a node, right? Let's get in touch with
right,
a hub,
exactly.
somebody that can kind of point
The
me in
guy
the
that would
right direction.
know. And to my complete surprise, Seth emailed me back. He was like, "Yeah, I don't know of anybody that does that." He's like, "I mean, there's general real estate cold calling companies out there that call single family homes, and they'll take the land investor here and there, but they're not specialized for land." So I tried a couple of them out and did not have good experiences, but it taught me a lot about how I wanted it done. And I knew from both doing it inside my own company and from those experiences what I was now looking for. And I kind of got inspired again by JT a little bit because I was like, okay, here's a guy that's still running a land business. And then at the time it was Your Land Loans. Now it's Terra Notes. He also built this other tool to help solve his own problem, which was he had all these notes and it was such a mess trying to deal with seller financing. So he's like, I'll build this and I bet other land investors would be interested. And so I kind of took some inspiration
I think so
from
often,
that.
right, as like an entrepreneur, that's what happens is you solve your own problem
Yeah.
first for yourself internally. And then if you don't just do it in a raw, like crude manner, but you kind of like have a sophisticated solution, right? That's stable and reliable, you start to recognize, hey, there's other people that probably have the same challenges that I just created a solution for. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah. So that's how Landcaller was born. So we started off small. I was our first client. My partner, who I started with, he's also my brother-in-law, but he also has a land flipping business because I had gotten him started in that. So he also, got his campaigns going, and then we just kind of grew from there. I think we are unique. Obviously, we're the first company that was focused on land investors. We don't
Exclusively, right?
exclusively.
On
Yeah.
land as the asset class. Yeah.
Yep. And I think the really unique thing is that to this day, to my knowledge, we're still the only company where the owners, the operators, whatever you want to call John and I, founders, like not only are we still involved in obviously running Landcaller, but we both still have very successful land flipping businesses, and we use all of our own leads for our land businesses. So
Yeah.
we're still down in the mud doing
Yeah.
deals on the day to day. So it's not like we're just a service.
Yeah.
Again, something I admire about JT is like you to really know the industry and to know how to pivot and how to provide the
Yeah.
best product for your clients. You really have to be in it. Like it's one thing to brand yourself as we call for land investors. It's another thing to be like, I'm doing deals literally every week,
Yeah.
and I use my own service. So
I agree. It's very similar, like with coaching and then us running a land
hmm
business. Like to have, if not, you're operating on old information and you're kind of
hmm
preaching and teaching and using strategies that worked yesterday or last year or last decade, right? But I think to have finger on the pulse of the market, that's where us, like when interest rates kind of went up a couple of years ago, and we have our own land business, and then we have a funding company, right? Like we knew right away, we saw days on market go up on the
hmm
sales side, and we felt it, and then we knew right away that like that that correlation to interest rates rising, and then all of a
Yep.
sudden buyers pumping the brakes on buying, builders pumping the brakes on building. So we saw that, we felt it like quarterly, you know what I mean, not like a year later. Is like kind of in real time. That's the beauty of being actively investing, is it's not just getting customer feedback or client feedback. You're usually in parallel at a very similar time identifying the same challenges, right, that they are, or observations of the
Yep.
market. So yeah, I
100%.
completely agree. Yeah.
I tell people all the time, like if, and it's not just land, like it's just, I mean, there's a coach for everything out there, right? But like if your coach is not doing what he's coaching,
Yeah.
you should probably question that. And so, yeah, I agree
Well, I think
completely.
that the thing is too, because it's not active, it's not current advice in any industry of
hmm
consulting. We've hired tons of like marketing, all these different things as we've grown our companies, grown our different companies and brands. And some of them were like, I would say like maybe they peaked, 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and their methods were fantastic, but they're not working in today's market. And they've got
Yeah.
a ton of testimonials, a lot of client success, but it was like a while ago, a new era, right? So there's I think it's really important, yeah, to go with, especially as markets shift, things are changing at a faster rate than they ever
hmm
have. So it's more important to be current and work with a vendor that's current. And that's where the other thing I think I like that I've appreciated with getting to know you and working with you is you're open to feedback or input, like based on what I
Always.
tell you I'm seeing, knowing that, hey, it's not just a one-off thing. It's like, hey, if this is something we're hearing more than once, it might make sense to entertain it. We talked a lot about in the beginning, you guys were exclusively had full-time cold calling packages, and they were 40 hours a week, and it was 3 months, 6 months, 1 year contracts. And we identified kind of a need for, there's a lot of customers that were like, hey, I kind of need like a part-time cold caller or more of a package, right?
hmm
And at the time, you guys were really committed to just servicing that very serious land investor that needed a full-time cold caller. But that also left a lot of people kind of in a spot where they go, where do I go? What do I do if I
Yeah.
only need a month of cold calling, or I just want to try it out, right,
Yeah.
before making that 6 month commitment or something? And I felt like you were really open to kind of giving that a try and making that offering, which opened things up to a lot of folks who maybe weren't comfortable committing to a 6 month or 12 month contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something we had heard. And like you said, we listen to the feedback. We're always trying. We're trying to be an innovative company. I mean, we've got a lot of things we're working on this year to try to add value, and it all stems from the ground up. Again, from listening to our clients, sending out surveys, which we do pretty frequently. We ask for people feedback all the time. And then again, from what I'm seeing or what John is seeing in our own land businesses, and trying to infuse that back into the company. So no, but you're exactly right. Giving more options for more potential clientele is only a good thing for our business. So
let me kind of explain what you guys do, because we jumped ahead a little bit, but let me explain kind of what you guys do, and then I'll kind of give the whole picture, and then you can kind of like break it down maybe from client onboarding to kind of taking people
Sure.
through that client journey, right? So you guys have a discovery call. You have kind of some onboarding, and then you're hiring a cold caller dedicated to that person most of the time, if they're full-time, not if they're just a part-time package. But you guys also, you're not just cold calling, because obviously the calls that need to be made are based on a marketing list. You guys have a service where you'll actually have it done for you. You pull the data, and for people who are sending direct mail or aren't familiar with cold calling, when we pull the data, we always have the mailing address, but we don't necessarily have the phone number. So the data, the marketing list has to be enriched via skip tracing to, append those phone numbers to each of the property owners. And then some other things people aren't familiar with it. Beyond that, like we probably want to look at things like who are the known litigators, like who are the people we don't want to call, right? So there's some other things that happen with the skip tracing, but you guys provide a data service. It's not a forced or it's not mandatory, but it's there. It's an option. You guys provide skip tracing because that needs to be done for you to make the calls. And then what I really like is you now have what you didn't have when I started working with you, a client portal where clients can log in, and we have like weekly KPIs, daily KPIs, right? A lot of things. So I cover a lot of ground, but I kind of want to just give an overview of what you guys offer and what might make you a little bit unique, or more, maybe not unique, but like kind of a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
I'll let you
Absolutely.
unpack that, Joe, kind of from people checking out the landcaller.com website to setting up that onboarding call. What does that client journey look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, we're super transparent. All of our pricing is on there. We have a pretty in-depth FAQ section. So people do sign up without a call, but of course we always want to be able to answer any questions that we have. So you can book a call on there. You'll probably speak, if you do that, with our head of sales, Madison, currently, and he's actually a former land caller and current land caller client. So that we brought on to land caller. It's really important to us that, going back to our roots of like, the people in our company need to know land. Like they can't just know cold calling. They can't just know sales or marketing. They need to know land. And so anyway, kind of sidetracked there. But yeah, you'd have a discovery call where basically you can just ask questions and learn about the basic blocks of our business. And then you kind of have a path to choose at that point. You can either go with a basic package, which is kind of what we discussed, and this is what's very common in the cold calling industry for real estate. Almost any competitor of ours or anybody doing single family home real estate has it set up this way, where you're essentially buying like a package of calls. X amount of calls will be made on your behalf associated with X amount of records. It's called basic because it doesn't have a lot of the features that our enterprise packages do, but it will get you leads, and it'll do it at a number of different price points that may fit within your budget or your timeline.
Yeah.
And those you can literally you pay for it up front. You put where you want to get the leads from, you pay for it, and then your leads, like you said, they get deposited right into your client portal. You get login information. Very easy. Doesn't have a lot of the features, I would say, that kind of put our name on the map. A lot of those things, when I said that I learned way back when I started the company, of like how I wanted to build a company, those mostly exist on our enterprise packages, which are contracted lengths, meant for a little bit more of a serious land professional, where you are getting that full-time cold caller. You're customizing your scripts. You've got a dedicated Slack channel. You're getting we're integrating with your CRM, so your leads are going directly into your CRM in addition to the online portal. There's a bunch of other things you can see on the website, but either way,
and that's fantastic. I'll touch on that integration for a minute, because we work with you guys on our software, Lead Boss CRM, getting an integration set up where there's no like zap, there's no webhook, there's nothing that can break, there's not a delay. We've got it set up where Lead Boss CRM clients can essentially have Landcaller. You guys plug in the lead as it comes in real time, and then it comes right into their pipeline, right
Yep.
in there, which is huge. That's
It is
it's,
huge.
yeah, it's fantastic. If anything, there's times I think people go, man, I could use a break. I wish there were a little delay because the leads come in hot. That's something about
Yeah.
cold calling. Maybe talk about that for a minute, kind of response rate, lead rate, whatever metric we're using or KPI we're using to kind of like, and maybe direct mail is a baseline or a reference. Like if I'm full-time cold calling with you, I know you guys have package where you'll dial 10 to 12,000. If I hand you a list of 10 to 12,000 owner records, that would be appropriate for like a full-time cold caller to call, 40 hours a week for that month. For me, what kind of number of leads can somebody expect if they hand you that list of 10 to 12,000 people? They're paying for a full-time cold caller monthly. So Joe, what kind of response rate are we getting? What kind of lead rate are we getting for cold calling, and maybe versus, direct mail is that baseline or that reference?
Yeah. So, like you said, a typical full-time campaign, you're looking at around 10, 12,000 records a month for that full-time cold caller. What you're typically going to see is somewhere in the range of 70 to 75 qualified leads sent to the client. But let me explain that a little bit so what's a lead, first of all, is a lead is somebody for us, a lead is somebody who answers all the questions on their script and then says, yes, I would like a follow-up phone call with Travis to discuss an offer, right? So, but we don't stop there. We actually have a second step, which kind of sets us apart. I don't know of anybody else that does this. Your caller doesn't actually submit your leads. It goes to a quality assurance process. And we are typically filtering out 5 to 15% kind of the trash. Essentially, they will either have been on the call with the caller or they'll listen to the recording, and they're going to filter out the people that are obviously being sarcastic, or people that are, throwing out ridiculous numbers that have no basis in reality, which we don't want the client spending time on that. So what gets sent to the client ends up being about 75 leads per month. So the response rate, that's anywhere from like a 0.5 to a 1.25% is what you're typically seeing. So it's fairly on par with what you see in the direct mail these days. The difference is that it's done at a third of the cost of direct mail. And so that's kind of where your savings really get made.
So we're talking, what'd you say, 50 to 75? Is that what you said for leads?
You're going to average, our average is pretty close to right around 70 to 75 leads.
70,
based on the
75
number
leads.
of records, that's typically like a 0.5 to 1.25% response rate.
And I feel like that's fair. Like, I feel like if you just being conservative, right, or low, if you bank on going, okay, I sent you 10 or 12,000 records, I should be able to bank on 0.5, like half of 1% for people kind of doing the math, right? If we got 10,000 records, about 50 leads is kind of fair to assume. And like you said, sometimes we've got more. I mean, I've had clients where like that we start cold calling and then they'll slack me and they're like, Travis, I got 8 leads my first day. Like, what do I do? Right? How do I keep up at this rate? Cause I'm kind of telling them, hey, you can bank on 2 to 3 leads a day. Right. And then you guys might have like 6 or 8 leads, in one day. And I said, well, it's not going to be like that every day. Right. But yeah, you'll certainly have days where you get that. Can you kind of explain how, like you said, it's kind of like those net leads, right? So like the leads you're providing, it's not just people answer the phone, because some people answer the phone and say, take a hike, how dare you, why'd you call me, right? So is there like a contact rate, or how many like how many people pick up and answer and talk versus like our actual end up as a lead?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, and we have a number of KPIs that our data team, we have a whole arm of our company who's the data team, and all their job is to look at all these KPIs for all of our campaigns and attempt to, their job is to stop a campaign from kind of falling off the cliff, right? So we track KPIs. One of those is contact rate, connect percentage. There's a number of KPIs that get delivered daily and weekly. And of course, I mean, it, most small business owners know it, most land investors know it, but like a KPI is a snapshot in time. And especially when you're dealing with huge amounts of numbers, you never just want to take a single number out and say like, oh, I only got 1 lead today. Like, what's going on? Or, my contact percentage plummeted today. It's about trends. It's about spotting trends before based on our data, we know very, very well. We're approaching 1 billion calls made over the course of this
Yeah.
company. So we've got a lot of data and a lot of
Well, and
experience to
that's
know,
key,
okay,
like you said, sample size, right? We need enough sample
yeah,
size where when we're tracking a
hmm
KPI, because it might be a competitive market, that campaign might be a super competitive market, right? We might have, like you guys recently, right? We had some natural disasters, in the Southeast, right? Which obviously impact things, right? We have holidays sometimes, right? That impact like answer rate and things like that. So you can't just measure it based on a month or a week. You kind of have to
hmm
look at the whole picture, right, to
yeah.
get the true metrics.
Yeah, exactly. So, so like for instance, and this is why I really hate kind of the industry standard of just selling phone calls. We do that for our basic
Yeah.
packages because it's really the only way to kind of structure it in such a way that makes sense for both client and the company. But
Yeah.
when you just make phone calls, that doesn't necessarily translate to results, because are you making the right phone calls at the right time to reach that person? And not every dial is going to get picked up. Sometimes it'll take 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, a dozen, 2 dozen
Yeah.
dials till that person finally picks up. So dials is something I really don't like as a standalone KPI. The best kind of standalone KPI to judge the health of a campaign is really how many people are you talking to, how many connects, what we call them, are you making
Yeah.
that day, and that number should be somewhere around 200. Again, a lot of variation there. If you have a longer script or you get a really couple of talkative folks on the phone, and so you're now spending a lot more time on the phone before you get to the next lead, then that obviously can impact your connects. But you want to be right around 200 connects for the day.
And how many dials does that take to be at 200 connects a day?
Well, that's the thing, is that there are a number of variables that go into that, right? So if you got a healthy list, like we just pulled it, we haven't started calling it yet. We've made sure we've got new numbers. Our numbers are scrubbed. They're registered with all the carriers, and we're calling right away. Then you're going to take a lot fewer dials because you're picking all that low hanging fruit first. And so you maybe only need a couple thousand dials to make a couple hundred connects. 4 weeks later, when we're getting right at the end of your list being run out, we've run through all the easy stuff. Although for us, again, something we do is we make sure we register and make sure your numbers are cleaned weekly so that you don't come up as spam on a handset. But a lot of companies don't do that, but that increases your pickup rate. But regardless, we've narrowed the list down. We've taken all the easy stuff out. So it might take 7, 8, 9, 10,000 dials on that same day to get the same
Yeah.
number of connects.
It's the same concept of like sending a secondary like direct mail campaign, right, to the on the heels of or back to back of one you just sent. You're probably on the front end going to have a bigger head, bigger response rate than that second campaign, right? Because like you said, all that low hanging fruit has already responded, and now you're trying to squeeze every last drop right out of the list. So that's a lot of dials. I mean, that's a lot of calls because over the course of a month. So something that people that are doing this, they'll understand this, but I'm more speaking for those that this is maybe a little unfamiliar. Okay, so if you have a list of 10 or 12,000 owners, and let's say we've skip traced, that list and found phone numbers for 85% of the folks on it. Through skip tracing, you can either just say, hey, give me the best number, like what do we believe is the most current number, one column, and then we're going to dial that 5 or 10 times, right? Probably. Or we can say, hey, give me like as many numbers, up to 5 or 6 associated with that individual at one time. That might be an old cell phone number, might be a second phone, we don't know, but we're going to dial all those numbers, right? So what people need to understand is that, we're sending a list of 10 or 12,000, but you're going to make, your team might make 40,000 plus dials, right? 40, 50,000 dials over the course of a month.
Oh,
is
no.
that fair?
Because it'll be way more than that.
You guys make more. You make more than that. I felt like looking at KPIs like 13,000, 15,000 a week sometimes. And that's because there are 3 to 5 numbers per person, right? Or you're making so many attempts per person. That's something that people need to be aware of, right? That how much effort, how many attempts and dials you're actually making.
Yeah, exactly, Travis. So let me break that down. So yeah, the numbers you gave, I would say, are on like kind of lower average, but I mean, we've seen as high as 150,000 dials in a month, right? There's a lot of, again, variables that go into that. So first of all, the numbers, how many numbers are you pulling? We use the first three, sometimes the first four, depending on a couple of factors, but anything after four is trash. But that is something that is different than our basic packages and kind of what everybody else does, which is just that first number. Because that first number, it is the best number. It is your
Yeah.
bid for
The
success. It
leftmost
is going to be the
column,
best
the
way to
first
get a hold of
number. Yeah.
them. Probably about 75% of the time, that's going to be the best way to get a hold of them. But numbers 2, 3, and 4 are also good. It could be a spouse's line. It could be a work line. It could be a landline. Other good ways to get a hold of them. So you are leaving deals behind if you're not using those numbers. But the problem is if you're paying for a certain amount of dials, you don't necessarily want to pay to dial this number 2, 3, and 4 because you want to pay to dial the best bid for success. So that's again where our kind of enterprise packages shine, is because we're doing it in a holistic way. We're going to call all those numbers. And so yeah, on the low end, you're looking at probably 40 to 45,000 calls in a month, but really I'd say the average is probably closer to 75 to 100,000, and it's not uncommon to get up to 150,000 calls. If it's a list that didn't have a lot of LLCs in it, so it's heavy with numbers and that sort of thing. So
that's a good point too. Like obviously the input of the list has a lot to do with the output or success of like matching and skip tracing. Anytime we have a bunch of corporates, LLCs, entities, things like that, they're the skips either aren't just going to be there or they're not going to be as accurate, right? I always kind of recommend like segmenting those out, and that's more of like a manual skip process, right? If you're going after those, but individuals, right? Like individual owners, you have a way higher match rate.
Yep.
On the skip, and you get there even if you don't get a number like with the corporation or the entity. You usually get the right person for the most part on the phone versus a corporation, right? Where you're probably not getting directly in touch with the individual who
And the other
owns the
thing I'll say
property.
is that, it's nice to get that infusion of leads, all that low hanging fruit. Your caller has really good ROI on their time because their time per lead is much, higher. Now, when you get towards the end of the month and now you've dialed this list, you're at 95,000 dials on this list and you're maybe getting a lead a day. Our job, as I view it, is to be the experts that say, okay, at this point, yes, could we still trickle out some leads? Of course. But the best ROI on your caller's time is going to be to find a new list, right? But what I will say is those, in my land business, what I've seen, and then this is obviously anecdotal, but I've heard this from other investors as well. A lot of times my best leads are actually those ones that just trickle in towards the end of a campaign. And I personally, my theory is that those people are a lot harder to get a hold of. So the people that we got a hold of really easily, they are also potentially a person that's also responding to text and also responding to direct mail. There's less price discovery to occur because they've been contacted by 3 or 4 different investors over the last few months. That person that we took 24 dials to finally get a hold of on their, third number, that's the type of person that's harder to get a hold of. So the fact that we got a hold of them after such a concentrated effort means it's very likely very few other competitors got a hold of them.
Yeah,
So we're working in a more
without question,
exclusive
like,
lead. Yeah.
Nobody else is relentlessly, making that many efforts or attempts. So yeah, I completely agree. You're already in, I mean, without question, top 5% of people doing marketing, right? If we're making more than 3 or 4 attempts, you put yourself in, and it's just like I tell people, there's a lot of players in the game, right? But there's also leagues, there's amateurs, there's minors, and there are major leagues, right? And there's a lot less like people operating at a land professional level, right? And that's what it takes. So that's what you take. They're going to get those deals that other people would make one attempt or one effort or one campaign on, right? So you're squeezing out those leads. So towards the end of the month, we might not have that as many leads per day or as high of a lead rate, but total leads, I've seen this really consistent with your company, like you say, 50 to 75 leads a month is really fair. To assume, you're going to end up with that many leads with a full-time cold caller. And then like speaking to the price, this is kind of just a generalization, but I've found cold calling to be, I don't know, maybe about 40% cheaper than direct mail. Is that fair or close in your opinion?
We have a lot of clients that mail as still.
Yeah.
So we do ask them to kind of keep track of mailing costs. Obviously, it seems the post office has been raising prices anywhere from
Oh
8
my
to ten
goodness.
percent
Yeah.
about every 6 months. So that keeps
Yeah.
going up. But in general, we found anywhere from 30 to 43% cheaper to call the same list than to mail the same size list.
Yep. So your
So
cost per
yeah.
lead goes down, which then means if we're still converting at a similar rate, the cost per acquisition, right, is going to go down as well. Now, you brought up a good point, because I think sometimes when you're new, I really do recommend, when you're new, I strongly encourage people to get good at one channel of marketing before you introduce 3 or 4 others, right? So I really, really do. And I don't care what channel it is, direct mail or cold calling, like focus on one until you got that figured out. But for those that become, more like intermediate or advanced investors and are looking to add that second layer, that's absolutely what we do. Is it's not like either or, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like one or the other. It's like, hey, it's both. It's kind of like, for me, if I send the direct mail campaign, I know it's probably going to be 7 or 10 or even more days before the leads start to come in. You activate a cold calling campaign. I think people that haven't done that before are really surprised, right? How like it's like leads on demand. You push the button and in 24, 48 hours, leads are coming in hot, right? So
Exactly.
that's the thing with
And
cold calling, kind of that speed to lead, right? We're getting a cheaper
speed to
cost per
lead,
lead, and we're getting it quicker.
and you can pivot more quickly, right? If you make it a couple days into a campaign and you realize, I don't really like that script question. Like, I'm not getting
Yeah.
the answers that I want. Like, let's change it up. Okay, you're fine. Well, like, change it up, and within hours you're asking a new question. If you mess something up or put something in your mailer that you decide you don't like, well, too bad. Like, you just sent
Yeah.
10,000 of them. So it's
Yeah.
it's definitely more agile, whether it's switching to markets or switching your approach to the lead. The other thing I'll say is, with all those cost savings, let's say 60% cost savings, right? What I see as our clients that are mailing, it allows them to use those savings smarter, right? So they take those savings and they reach out to the list first with us, because we're way cheaper and we have wide broadcast. And then we'll give them a what's called a disposition report, which basically breaks down their entire list and says, okay, here's all the people that said, don't ever contact me again. Here's the people that were leads. Here's the people that said, hey, I'm not interested right now, but talk to me in the future. Here's the people we couldn't get a hold of. And then they can go now mail a much smaller list and be much more focused with their marketing dollars on the mail side. So it's also saving them money on mail. Because why are you going to mail the person that literally just told you this week, I'm not interested right now, check again in 6 months? You're not going to go mail them right now. Or the person that said, I'm never selling this land, don't ever contact me again. That's a wasted 70 cents. So that adds up.
Well, it does. And I think, like, if we're looking at, like, hey, what's the smartest, most efficient way to market to our list? There's some of the things you do where it's where I am a fan of, like, I'm not against texting by any means, but I'm a fan of, I prefer cold calling, because we reach the people with landlines, and it's not just mobile only, right? That's the limiting thing with texting. We're mobile only. And whereas landlines tend to be sometimes those extended owners who've owned 10, 20 years or more, they're more, it seems to be the demographic that has landlines. So I like cold calling because we're reaching both. Obviously, it's substantially more cost per lead, probably, 3 to 6x what a text costs for a cold call. But we're getting everybody. We're getting everybody in one swoop and not excluding people. But I'm with you. I kind of like the marketing funnel. Now, everybody doesn't have this budget. Everybody doesn't have the internal staff to keep up with this, right? But that's kind of like with a marketing list we have. There's a lot of things you do in your own business, right? That you go, okay, I can't teach, I can't educate, because I can't be current in all 50 states and laws in all 50 states and tell you what you can or can't do. Can you drop a ringless voicemail here? Can you send a text here? You know what I mean? Can you send a letter, a cold call? It's different, right? So that's the thing with educating, but knowing, like, in our own business, taking that whole list, like, it's like we can RVM the whole thing first at, 4 cents, you know what I mean? 4 cents a
Don't
record,
RVM.
right? You could in the old days, you know what I mean? A lot of changed in the last 18 months, you know what I mean? A lot has changed in the last year or so, but it used to be kind of, that's what it was. It was like, you top of the funnel, you'd be like, what's the cheapest cost per lead, right? And it's like, we'd RVM everybody. And then you move from RVM to text, which was, You're at 4 to 6 cents with those methods. Then you move down to cold calling. And then you're right. Then what's left on the list that hasn't responded or said, never call me again, those are the folks you direct mail. Nowadays, you're right. There's a lot of laws changing and stuff with RVM and other things. But certainly, if you cold call first, you get all those leads from that. And then all the people you weren't able to reach, right? Great candidates for direct mail, which is now a more expensive cost per unit, but we've already taken care of a chunk of our list. So I'm a fan of kind of like marrying the two together versus pitting them against each other. I just think a lot of time for beginners, it's really best to focus on one channel. And usually beginners don't have the marketing budget to be actively doing
multi-channel
anyway. But yeah, anything you want to add? I feel like we did good. We covered a ton of ground. I feel like we didn't just hit that like overview, kind of dove in and talked about KPIs, the client portal, the metrics.
The only thing I would say about I just want to make a comment, because I think I would disagree with you. I know it's not usually polite to disagree with your host, but something you said, because we're looking into this about adding texting services. And so I think you said 3 to 6 times cheaper. It's really not that much cheaper. It is a little bit cheaper, but it's actually not that much, because if you look at, so our average enterprise client spends around $3,300 all in, including data, skip tracing, TCPA, litigator scrub, everything, about $3,300 a month for 12,000 records. So that's about 28 cents a record all in. Okay.
Yeah.
But about 10 cents of that is all the data costs, which you have to do all those same data costs with texting anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're down to about 18 cents for manpower and some of the things that are specific to, and software, manpower and software. But your software on the texting side, like I think the cheapest launch control package right now, which is what a lot of people use, is like $500 a month. Okay. So, and that's 10,000 messages. So what we found is that it's actually only about a 10 to 15% cost savings to text a lead versus calling them.
Really?
In our research. Yeah.
Well,
if you're accounting for your manpower and your software costs.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. If we build in labor of like a full-time texting VA, that's absolutely completely agree. Yeah. Because once we add in, that changes things. Yeah, I would agree with that. If you have a full-time texting VA or something and aren't just dropping it from a software, building in that labor, I think that's fair. The other thing is where it's cheap to drop that initial text, like I'm saying, 4 cents, 5 cents to drop that text. I don't know, let's say 8 to 16%, because it is really high response rate with they're terrible leads, or they're not terrible leads. They're not high quality leads. It takes a lot of leads to a conversion. Let's say that with texting, you get a really high response rate, but it takes a lot of leads per conversion versus these other channels. Right. But those folks, there's more than one text going back and forth.
Right.
So there's a cost per text, right? You're right. That would take it from like the 4 or 6 I talked about. For your response rate, the 8 or 16%, you're going to have that cost per text. But I think the biggest cost, like you're saying, more than the software, is if you're hiring either like a done for you or a full-time VA doing it. That's what jacks up the cost.
Right. Yeah,
versus
it's labor.
using
And
like
if you're doing it yourself,
drops,
those aren't real savings. Like if you're doing it yourself, you're just paying yourself instead. So instead of hiring a VA for $7 an hour, you're now paying yourself $7 an hour.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I'm worth at least 10, Joe. I'm worth at least $10 an hour. But sometimes you find yourself doing those $7.
Oh man,
Joe,
I know.
Tell me about that real quick. So you guys are thinking about adding some texting in addition to cold calling?
We are. So we put out a poll recently that had a number of multiple choice options about features that we plan on adding this year. Texting was not one of them, and just getting people's gauge on what they wanted to see first. So some of the other things we're doing comp reports now to send over to clients. We're going to be adding call answering services for our clients that are doing mail campaigns.
Oh, so excellent. Yeah, we'll have to talk more about that.
Answer the phone for their mail campaign. But we obviously left the option open because we'd like to hear from clients. Like, what else would you like to see? And we got a pretty high response of it'd be great if you guys did done for you texting. I have some reservations. We're keeping a close eye on the regulatory environment.
Yeah.
Texting is much more litigious than cold calling. And there's a lot of, you got to be much more careful. We're also already have to be careful with compliance, but texting even more so. Yeah. So there's some things we got to work out. It would be it seems like there's the demand there. And like you said, we try to listen to our clients. We've just got to weigh the risk versus reward there, but it is something we're looking at potentially adding this year.
Well, and do you feel like, I feel like, just objectively looking at it, there seems to be more like variance state to state, like the laws and legalities seem to be more changing. Now, like, so direct mail, I wouldn't say is like national or universal, right? But I would say like there's less fluctuation with direct mail laws, right?
Yeah.
From going from state to state. There's more with cold calling, but less than other channels. Do you feel like, are you seeing that as you kind of do that research with texting, like the having to keep up what you can do and, what you can do in Georgia versus what you could do in Arizona is different with texting?
Not necessarily state to state. What the difference is that texting as a mass marketing medium is pretty new, right? Like mass texting for leads for real estate was not a thing really at all in like 2019, 2020. I mean, a couple people are doing it, but like it's really just blown up the last few years. And like anything else in America, like the government is always catching up to the business side of things,
They're
right?
lagging,
So like
yeah.
people, it's always lagging, right? So cold calling has been around since phones were invented. I mean, even cold calling as a mass marketing medium has been around since the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So the regulations are very well established. The court precedents for cases very well established. That's not to say there hasn't been changes. There's not things that are adjusting that, like AI and new software, but the changes are relatively minor. Like you pretty much know what you can do with cold calling if you're just cold calling. With texting, RVMs, these newer technologies, the regulations and the legislation is like now catching up to what's been in use. And so you're seeing a lot swifter changes in the regulatory environment. It's kind of giving people whiplash. It's like back and forth. Like we were just supposed to have this one-to-one consent TCPA rule that from the FCC that was supposed to go into effect on January 27th. In fact, I did our Landcaller community call last week, and I was literally telling them about it on the call. Quite literally 30 minutes after the call, the 11th Circuit put a stay on it for a year. So it's like there's kind of like all this back and forth. So it's a rapidly changing environment. So it does make it difficult to stay compliant in that environment.
Yeah, no, I could absolutely see that. So you're saying RVM though, that's maybe even more volatile or more litigious than texting?
Very much so. Our RVMs are, I would say, and our lawyer thinks they're illegal. I mean, it is definitely the ripest fruit for suing, and there are massive cases going on.
But heads up, so folks, be careful out there what you were doing years ago.
RVM, you are definitely playing with fire, big time fire, because there was a court case.
We're talking about cold. We're not talking about somebody who's hit your website as a lead, check the box, and said, yes, I opt in.
Cold RVMs, you are just waiting to get burnt. And here's a very important thing for your listeners. There was a case that came out in 2024, the TCPA, that found, so it's now court precedent, that owners of companies are personally liable for TCPA violations. So basically what happened was this company got sued for all these violations. This is like $4,500 per violation, right? So he had all these RVMs. I think it was RVMs. He gets sued for all of them. He's like, well, I mean, I'm bankrupt. Like I only had 100,000 or whatever. And however big the judgment was, millions. And the court said, no. Company owners are personally liable. So they'll go after your house. They'll go after personal bank accounts, everything else. So I wouldn't touch RVMs with a 10-foot pole.
And I would just say that highlights not just the RVM thing, but just the arm's length, some of this marketing. Like if you're worried about do not call, known litigators, you're worried about those things. That's sometimes why we choose a third party. That's why I would suggest somebody work with you versus like, can I cold call myself? Yeah, you can cold call yourself. You're probably not going to be, dialing 20,000 dials a day like Joe's team is doing, right? You're probably dialing 300, maybe 500 yourself or whatever, right? But what I'd say is sometimes outsourcing. One, you don't have to manage the person. That's for me is I look at like that opportunity cost of a lot of times when we bring things internal, we can control quality assurance better. Right. Even than a really good vendor.
Yeah.
However, the cost of that is that we've now got to manage that person, that employee, like if things change or we want to let them go. Right. It's a consideration. So that's a couple of the reasons I like outsourcing it is one, I'm putting the liability on you. And two, I don't have to manage the employee and I don't have to commit to them being like a full-time employee. So I'd say just like think about that for people that are trying to say, well, this is something I could do myself. You go, yeah, like a lot of things you probably could do it yourself. But if you break it down to that like hourly rate, of you doing it, does it make
Exactly.
sense?
I mean,
And are you willing
that
to
was
take on the
my math.
liability? Yeah.
That was my math. And I shudder to think about the things I did completely non-compliant when I was doing it in-house. Like I
Right.
definitely dodged some bullets. And
Yeah.
I'll say like Landcaller, like I said, we're approaching 1 billion calls made. Neither we nor any client has ever been sued. And I'm really proud of that because not only do we make sure we maintain compliance, but we're protecting our clients. So,
Well, and I'll vouch for you guys. I'll validate it. We'd have to pull those stats and see how many of those calls, right, were through our clients that I've referred over or are working with you guys. But you guys have been really, really consistent. The quality has been there. The lead rate has been there. And it's really nice to be able to recommend a vendor and know, right, that they're not going to damage your reputation. They're going to kind of uphold their part and deliver that service, man. You guys are doing an awesome job. And you're also,
thanks.
you're kind of not like becoming complacent. You're constantly improving with the client portal. That was a huge, huge value add and gave transparency to what's really going on versus just selling dials, So, yeah, man, kudos. You guys are doing awesome out there and I hope you guys just continued growth. So I'm going to encourage everybody to check out landcaller.com. If you go to the episode webpage, check that out. We're going to link to Landcaller. Also, if you use coupon code Travis during your onboarding form, it'll knock off. I don't know. We'll see. We don't want to timestamp this. It
$200, I
might
think.
change, but I think it's $100,
Yeah.
$150,
Right.
the onboarding fee or something. So yeah, check out Landcaller. Check out the episode webpage. All the show notes for this will link to everything over there. But if you're not actively cold calling, definitely entertain it. Hey, thanks, Joe. Anything I missed or any way people should connect with you?
No, that's great. Definitely through our website's the best option. And Travis, I just gotta say, it's a pleasure working with your students. It's always we get folks that are working with you. We know that we're getting somebody who can really action our leads. So keep sending them because we love having them. And thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. All right, man. Take care out there.
All right.
See you, Joe.
See ya.
Thanks for tuning into The King Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Also, don't forget to head over to travisking.com for show notes, resources, bonus content, and more ways to connect with me and the guests that you hear on the show. Remember, greatness is already within you. It's time for you to boss up and claim it. Stop building someone else's empire and start building your